A song of the ascent. Those who trust in the Lord are as Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forever. This part from Psalm 125 is actually describing the spot from where we are now. We are on the top of the city of David, the southern part of the eastern hill of ancient Jerusalem. In front of us to the north, the Temple Mount, Mount Moriah. To the east, to the left, we have the ridge of Mount of Olives, the mountain which is east of the Holy City. West of us, on the hilltop, the western hill of Jerusalem, and in between the two hills, the Central Valley. Just behind me, on the slope of the eastern hill, lies the city of David, a small part of the city which was conquered by David when he decides to found here the center of his government and to build his capital here in Jebus, the Canaanite city, which was a foreign enclave between his tribe, the tribe of Judah, to the south, and the northern tribes of Israel, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Only from here, from this hilltop, you can see that all the mountains around us, surrounding us, are actually overlooking the city. So it means that this part of the land has really doesn't have much strategic value, since it is controlled for all around, the mountains all around. Therefore, there was another reason why David has decided to choose this place and to form his capital here, the eternal capital of the people of Israel, the holy city of Jerusalem. Now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land. David captured the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. So David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. Then Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David with cedar trees and carpenters and stonemasons, and they built a house for David. And David realized that the Lord has established him as king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. I'm sitting here below the entrance to the visitor centers at the city of David. Here on the bedrock around me remains from different periods of time, from the Second Temple period around 2,000 years ago, water cisterns, building, and ruins. Almost 20 years ago, when the National Park of the City of David decided to develop this area, archaeological excavations were conducted here by the late archaeologist Dr. Eilat Mazar. Eilat Mazar excavated here in order to lay here the foundation of the new building, but as you know, in Jerusalem, especially in the ancient parts, whenever and wherever you're going to excavate and dig into the ground, you're going to find ancient remains. And among the different periods that were found here, until she reached the bedrock, she found a massive building which one of its walls, its northern wall, can be seen behind me. The eastern wall, right over here with the corner where the two walls meet, just to the right. When Eilat Mazar excavated the site, it was obvious that she's now in a layer which is the Iron Age, Iron II, meaning the time of the monarchy. But maybe one of the most important finds was right behind me, in a space which was full with dirt, earth, that was piled inside. When this dirt was sifted, pottery from the 10th century BCE appeared. And that was a big excitement here, because the 10th century, in all the areas that have been excavated here in the city of David already for, let's say, 160 years maybe, the 10th century, the time of David and his son Solomon, are missing. So where is this famous capital that David founded, the center of his government, here in the center of the territory of the Israelites? The pottery that appeared here from the 10th century and its relation to the large structure which is located at the top of the hill. We are now on the northest and highest part of the city of David, the small city that David conquered, former Jebus. The fact that it is located on the hilltop overlooking all the city which goes below, and the fact that this is not a private house, these are remains of a public structure. With the relation to the pottery, the conclusion of Dr. Mazar was, and it was published in the media in a lot of huge excitement, that she found not less than the Palace of David. Well, there is substantial evidence that this area was indeed probably a government center, administrative center, maybe even a palace. Already in the excavations that were done here, when this was part of Jordanian territory in the 50s and the 60s, before the 6 Days War, a huge Proto-Ionian capital was found on the slope which goes down from this area. During Eilat Mazar excavations, she found here bula, very tiny pieces of pottery, with names of officials, among them officials that are mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. It means that we are in the last generation of Jerusalem before its fall by the Babylonians, but this is of course much later than the time of King David here. But the fact that there are here remains of a large public buildings and the administrative function of this area, together with the pottery, that brought Eilat Mazar to the conclusion that she found the Palace of David, which is mentioned in the second book of Samuel after the conquest of Jebus, and with the assistance of David ally in the north, the Phoenician king of Tyre, Hiram, who brings him building materials, cedar wood, and masonry builders to build a magnificent palace right here. So is this the Palace of David or not? It is still debated. A lot of archaeologists raised the question, the logical question is that no floor was actually found adjacent to those walls, and therefore the fact that the pottery was found inside the fill of one of the spaces doesn't mean that the pottery is from the time of the building of those walls, which everybody agrees are from the Iron II period, but it could have been later than the time of David. Anyway, David's palace, which is described in the book of Samuel, should have been built in this area. So whether are those walls or another building which is still maybe waiting to be excavated here in the neighborhood, this still remains a question, but maybe still the big question mark lies here, if we are indeed in David's palace in Jerusalem. When the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to seek out David. And when David heard of it, he went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines came and spread themselves out in the valley of Rephaim. From this text, which shows us for the first time that now the Philistines understood that David no longer is their allies. Remember, he did not participate in the final battle between the Philistines and the Israelites in the foothills, of Mount Gilboa, when King Saul died. When David conquers Jerusalem and decides to build here his palace, now the Philistines understand that he is going to be their enemy. So they come from the lowlands all the way to the central hill country, to the area of Jerusalem, from the valley of Rephaim. And when David hears it, he goes from his palace to the stronghold of Zion that he conquered before. It means that the palace indeed was in the highest point of the city of David. And this also maybe gives another support to the identification of this area here as the place where David built his palace. Behind me, you can see this massive step structure, which is a retaining wall supporting the cliff and the very steep slope that goes all the way down to the Kidron Valley, which is east of us. This massive wall was already discovered more than 100 years ago in one of the earliest excavations here in the city of David, one of the most excavated sites in the entire world, and still being excavated until today. You can see that on the top of this structure, there is the wall that we saw before inside the so-called David's palace. So now we can see it from outside. When this massive wall was discovered, it was already identified maybe with the term the citadel of Zion, the stronghold that David conquers in Jebus, as we read in chapter 5 in the second book of Samuel. So it was obvious that this massive structure here was actually built in order to support a very large building on the top. So it was like no surprise to understand that there is a large administrative building, maybe from the time of David, maybe later, which is right there on the hilltop. The archaeologists are still not sure if this structure was already built in the late Bronze Age, meaning in the last phase of the Canaanite Jerusalem, the biblical Jebus, or maybe it was built already in around the 10th century. Therefore, maybe it was part really in the administrative buildings that were built in the city of David in the time of David himself. It is interesting to refer to the term Zion, which we find it for the first time in this story about the capture of Jebus by David, the stronghold of Zion, the citadel of Zion. The name Zion is probably a foreign name, which was in some way related to the foreign population here in Jebus. The Jebusite are not known to us from any other extra-biblical source. We find them only in a relation in the Bible itself as the ancient name of Jerusalem, one of the ancient names of Jerusalem. And therefore we don't know for sure what was really the origin of this population, if there were indigenous people living here or maybe in some way related to other cultures that we know. We know that, for example, Hittites were living here. Uriah the Hittite was living here in Jerusalem or in Jebus. Araunah the Hittite, the man that from which David bought the field or the threshold on which he's later going to build an altar. And therefore, we really don't know what was the origin of this population. Anyway, the term Zion later on refers to the Mount Zion, which is the Temple Mount, or Mount Moriah, where the temple was built in the time of Solomon. It is very interesting to see that the name Zion shifted to the western hill of Jerusalem, where today the Armenian Jewish quarter and Mount Zion, which is outside of the walls of the old city today, where the Dormition Abbey is located, and the Hall of the Last Supper. In the Byzantine period, the name Zion shifted over there. But through generations, especially among the Jewish people, the name Zion was an alternative name of Jerusalem, the whole Jerusalem, and later on, the name of the entire country, the land of Zion. Therefore, it was not surprising that in modern times, in the late 19th century, the national Jewish movement called itself Zionism with a hope and the aim to return back to the land of Zion, that the Jewish people will return back to their homeland, to the land of Zion.